Good afternoon. The title of my talk is Urban Resilience, Regional Resilience and Behavior. This is a rather general title, I know. However, the purpose of the talk is not to provide you with a detailed case study, but more an overview of activities I'm involved in, together with Yoshiki on the one hand, and with my colleagues from ISIS Institute in Graz on the other hand. ISIS is standing for Institute of System Sciences, Innovation and Sustainability Research. Don't mix it up with another ISIS or ISIS that recently made it to media, namely the Islamic State for Iraq and Syria. So I'm not from this group. Okay, just to give you some information about my perspective, I consider myself as a social scientist, or more precise, a social scientist who does not like disciplinary borders. So my research topics involve human decision making and collective behavior, and in particular I'm interested in how decisions made on individual levels shape collective outcomes. And for that I'm also applying methods from system sciences, but not, as I said, from a social science perspective, not so much natural science perspective. Okay, the first activity I want to report here is my teaching on urban resilience, which I started in Graz last semester. This has been a master level course. We are in a lucky situation that ISIS is offering study programs, joint study programs for international students. So we get a lot of students from all over the world, and it's quite nice to interact with them. And for them I offered a course which kind was an introduction to common concepts of resilience. The focus, however, was on urban resilience. And it turns out that cities, unlike companies, are very resilient structures. So if you consider history, I cannot think of many cities that got destroyed and never bounced back, in a sense. Maybe Pompeii, the ancient Pompeii in Italy after the volcano eruption. But there are not so many examples. So most cities manage to bounce back despite severe extreme events and shocks. In this course, these extreme events were somehow the focus of the course, and we dealt with the question, how can cities prepare for the unexpected events? But not so much about avoiding being extincted, but more about mitigating the effects of shocks, so coping with large-scale shocks. And this, of course, under consideration of social and psychological resilience. Cities usually are not resilient because they have so good infrastructure, but it's more about the social structure that remains. Even if all the infrastructure is destroyed or heavily damaged, like in Dresden, for example, or New Orleans, due to Hurricane Katrina, the cities somehow manage to come back. Although the cities might undergo a significant change due to this large-scale shock. The students were supposed to jointly conduct case studies about their home cities, and as a result we had some not only teaching material available, which, by the way, I'm very happy to share if you're interested. So this includes PowerPoint slides on different aspects of resilience, but also basic readings and video material from the web. The student case studies on urban resilience involved these. I mean, it was more than these 4 cities, but these are the 4 I would be more or less happy to share. The others did not meet my standards of quality. So, but Khabarovsk, Mexico City, Hong Kong, Seattle, we have student case studies on that and about their vulnerability, so sorry, to certain events and how they might cope with these shocks. Of course, we should deal with these studies, how shall I say, these are student case studies. We should not overestimate their value, but also not underestimate it. It's a nice starting point if you are interested in doing research in one of these cities. Okay. Another project I'm involved in, together with Yoshiki, is behavioral aspects of urban resilience. So a lot of the discussion on urban resilience is dominated by infrastructural aspects. The human component very often is missing. So we are dealing with the question, how do people react to extreme events? And you might have a Hollywood picture in your mind with people panicking, looting, storming some shops and stealing whatever is there. Reality sometimes, or most of the time, is a little bit different. So people turn out to be, despite the chaos, quite organized. And of course, lootings and all this stuff, it does occur, but it's very often exaggerated by media, because this is just making up for nice stories. So, but of course, a lot of flawed information is circulating after such events. You have a lot of rumors and so on, and sometimes you also have violence. But usually, I can only speak for first world countries, usually not on a large scale. At least with these events which we have been observing so far. One question is, how shall we model human behavior in so-called agent-based simulation models? Yoshiko already mentioned one simulation model in his presentation. We are planning to do more, and we are also planning to do one concrete scenario or one concrete model for this electricity sharing case, which has been mentioned before, where an extreme event shuts down or causes the crash of the electricity grid, but you have to a certain degree available decentralized energy production from PV and maybe electrical vehicles as storage capacity. And for this assumed case, we want to implement a simulation model, a rather basic simulation model, which deals with the question, how do individual decisions on micro level affect macro level outcomes, and can we come up with a basic supply for a neighborhood in such a post-disaster scenario. The implementation of this model is currently ongoing. I don't want to go into too much details here. We don't have simulation results so far, but we have a very basic model which is under construction. We have different types of agents in this model. Of course, we have houses which might have PV installations attached or detached, or no PV at all. We have electric vehicles in some attached or belonging to some of the houses. And of course, the agents in this model, the citizens, interact with each other to share information, for example, about available electricity sources, available PV plants which are still running, and also share PV with each other. And we have a very simple cartoon-like presentation. I hope you don't, I know it's not a high-end resolution, nice graphics, but it serves its purpose. Hope you're fine with that. So this is how a model might look like. So you have different houses in a rather scattered neighborhood here. This is just prototypic, so, and very preliminary. Houses without PV are red in this model. You have electric vehicles with some houses, and you have houses with PV which are marked yellow here. And then the idea is that the agents in their vehicles move and share PV and exchange information. And they might, of course, also move without their EVs. We have some modeling considerations which we're thinking about. We have different characteristics for buildings. We have a basic energy demand, which might not be the full energy demand. So the calculations in the last presentations were with full demand, but we can assume that people are willing to adapt to changing circumstances. So if we have a disaster, people might be willing not to use elevators, or maybe not to use air conditioning so heavily. If there is knowledge about scarcity of electricity supply, of course the demand is also likely to go down if this is communicated in a certain way. Of course, EVs have different characteristics, battery capacity, current battery level, and also people are different. Actually, agents in this model are supposed to be heterogeneous, so people are different, have different attitudes, different experience, and so on. But what we also observe often in post-disaster scenarios is that the heterogeneity slightly decreases. Okay, because I'm running out of time, I also want to mention another project or another line of research we are following with our colleagues at ISIS, which is about decentralized renewables. In Austria, you will very often see such pictures, so large farm buildings, also residential buildings with photovoltaics attached. We also might see biogas plants and biomass plants. These forms of renewable energy are subsidized by the government in the form of feed-in tariffs. So above market prices are guaranteed to producers or to adopters of photovoltaics and other renewable energies. And this, in my opinion, absolutely makes sense because we have a huge dependency of rural regions, countryside regions on fossil fuels, but at the same time we have the potential to meet the energy demand there directly. And if you then utilize renewables, this of course increases the adaptive capacity of such a region. What we are looking at is the behavioral reaction to the availability of public subsidies for renewables. And what we see here is, for example, the emergence of collective arrangements, whole new institutions coming up to market or to collectively produce electricity out of renewables. But what we also see is surprises in terms of side effects and maybe even negative side effects. I will just mention one example here, example of biomass. As you might know, the agricultural lobby in Austria is rather strong, and of course they were very much supporting the availability of subsidies for biomass, for example. And as a result, many farmers built up biomass plants. And this is fine, but due to the increasing number of biomass plants, also the prices for wood went up. Okay, natural reaction. So in the end, the subsidies were not sufficient anymore. Many of these plants went bankrupt. And at the same time, the paper and pulp industry, where we also had a presentation today, is suffering heavily from the increased price in resources. And exactly this industry is a very important employer in many countryside regions in Austria. And if they decide to leave the country, we of course have a decrease in adaptive capacity again. So that's all for now. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to discussions.